Vicky says, I've always felt guilty for disliking the writings of Paul. Not so much now. I see I'm not alone. A lot of people have a problem with Paul. And what I will say about Paul's writings, is this. It requires that we take the time to understand the author and to understand the context that the author finds himself in. And it requires us to understand that Paul is speaking from a cultural, in many ways, Paul is speaking from a cultural understanding. If we can figure that out, if we can come to grips if we can challenge ourselves, because I'm not sure we can ever truly figure it out, and I don't know if we can ever truly come to grips with it, but if we can challenge ourselves to accept that he is speaking from a different place than we are hearing it, to a different people than we are, at a different time and with different traditions, and just a completely different society, different societies. There's many different cultures. Then we can start pulling it out. And we can say, okay, this might be a cultural thing, and I can take it aside, and I can take that aside, and I can take the other thing aside. And if we can do that, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it. Because the message that he's offering is truly, truly beautiful. It really is. I mean, his letters, you think about it, he's writing these letters. He's not writing scripture. He's writing a letter to respond to something that he has heard from another church, from a church, right? So Thessalonica, he's writing a letter to the church in Thessalonica, He's writing a letter to the church of Thessalonica because he's heard something either from them or about them, and he's addressing it. But we don't know what that thing is. All we have is his response, and so we can conjecture what the response, what the question is or what the issue is, but we don't really have it. So, but he's speaking to it, and it can be gorgeous, but it does require us to peel away what we think might be cultural, might be a personal bias, peel away this and that, and to try to look through it. And sometimes we got to put that stuff back because it doesn't fit without it. And we go, okay, I got to put it, but it can be truly Paul. Paul does offer us a lot. He was in a really, from our perspective, kind of a messed up culture, and a society that didn't at all work the way we have been blessed to exist. The society that he lived in didn't work at all like the one we live in. And we have to, again, if we're going to study it, we have to be willing to say, yeah, okay, here's what's going on here. Let's pull this out. What might be happening? What was going on in Ephesus? What was going on for Timothy? What was going on in Corinth? What was going on in Rome? What's he addressing? Anyhow, we can talk about that another day. But I would encourage you, as you go forward, just listen for the theme and pull away, push to the side and pull away and navigate your way through the cultural and societal stuff that's in there and see what he's saying about Christ and what he's saying about grace and what he's saying about Christian living. And keep something in mind. This passage, I'll bring it up again, from Ephesians. We saw it in the church for years and years and years after Paul wrote this, right? Women should obey their husbands. We saw it to the extent that we included it in the marriage vows, that for the wife, she was going to love, honor, and obey her husband. That would have been that message, right? Ephesians, I think it's Ephesians 24, would have been completely culturally acceptable in Paul's day. It would have been completely culturally acceptable in Paul's. Every guy there would have went, yeah, that's right. Paul got it right on that one. This passage comes along. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Well, we remember that Christ loved the church so much that Christ died on the cross. You're telling me I should love my wife enough to die for my wife? You're telling, so Paul in this passage, given where he is, at the time he is, he's telling husbands they should love their wives and be willing to give themselves up for their wives. He's saying this to a bunch of guys who would have seen their wives as property. This would have been a completely counter-cultural statement. This would have made people scratch their heads. This would have made people walk out of the church. I'm not listening to that fool anymore. Who does he think he is? I don't have to love her. I don't just use, right? At a time when women, in many cases, would have been seen as little more than property. Here he is saying you should have an emotional connection to your wife that would lead you to be willing to sacrifice yourself for her. You should love her as much as you love your own body. This is countercultural, right? And I know I'm all of a sudden I'm making myself to be an apologist for Paul. That's the culture he was in, the society he was in. That passage wouldn't have been well received. It wouldn't have been well received. It wouldn't have been well considered. It would have been. It might have been confusing. It would have been so out there. Anyhow, sorry, folks. I am off on another rant.